Hey guys, I hope you all are doing awesome. After I think all day I was trying to edit this video, but at the end of it, I don't know what was the issue. Things didn't work out. The what's it called? The universe had it planned that I'm not gonna be able to create video. So here we go. Take number 5 or 6. So anyway, in today's live stream, we're gonna be talking about PostgreSQL domain, and you know what? Live streams works best for me compared to um, video recording. I just hate editing. I mean, it is what it is. At the end of it, let's start again. So today we're gonna be talking about PostgreSQL domain. By that, I'm not talking about PostgreSQL, like www or subdomain or something like that. I'm talking about a user-defined construct which allows abstraction of data types where you have defined your own constraint, and that to be useful, that to be used for across your team, across your schema, so that you don't have to redefine the constraint again and again. By the way, if you hear no sound in the background, my girlfriend is taking a shower, so just never mind. All right. Okay, enough talk. So today we're gonna go through some content, and let me walk you through the overall sequence. So yeah, we're gonna be talking about PostgreSQL domain. So firstly, we're going to be taking a look at what is actually PostgreSQL domain. We're going to be walking through the PostgreSQL documentation, and we'll be taking a look at how do we create domain, why is domain useful. We will see how to use domain in tables. We will take a look into 2 examples. One second. Okay, yeah. We'll be taking a look at 2 examples, and apart from that, give me 1 second. I'm just checking. YouTube Live is telling me something here. Okay. Okay, cool. I am live. So we're gonna be taking a look at the 2 examples where we would be utilizing a domain and see how we see multiple use cases of domain pretty much. Apart from that, then we're gonna be taking a look at or try to peel off the layer like we do for an onion and take a look at how it works internally and try to understand, try to make sense of the whole thing of how domains work inside PostgreSQL. There's 1 or 2 gotchas which we have to think about while working with PostgreSQL domain. Finally, we will take a look at how to alter domains which you have already defined, and at the end of it, we're going to be taking a look at the source code, okay, and try to make sense of what we can. So without wasting more time, let's get started. What is a domain really? As I said, and as you can see on the left side, domain is a user-defined layer or abstraction on top of the data types already available in Postgres. So let's say you want for all the tables email to be standardized. Let's say you have an employee directory and you want all emails. You have an employee database and say multiple tables in that particular database need to utilize emails, and you want to standardize the emails so that only, let's say, teachmedatabase.com suffix are allowed in email addresses. In that case, you can set a domain which is again an abstraction of the data type varchar or text, whatever you prefer. I prefer varchar. And on top of it, you can define a constraint where you can add a regex, regular expression, and you can say like, hey, I want all the emails to be ending with @teachmedatabase.com. Okay, so Let's get in here. Let's see. All right, cool. So create domain. How do we create a Postgres domain? Actually, let's read the definition here. A domain is essentially a data type with optional constraint, which is restrictions on the allowed set of values. The user who defines the domain becomes its owners. Okay. A domain is only defined for the scope of a schema. So for across all types in a particular schema, you can have only one domain. So you can't do like one domain for data type integer, one domain for data type varchar. You can only have one name. You know, you can't have polymorphism inside a schema. So anyway, let's start with the examples and we can learn together. So how do we create a domain? Well, it's pretty simple, and I'm using data grep ID. If you guys don't know it, I have attached data grep ID download link. I think it's one of the best ID for, especially for learning or using databases. And yeah, I think you should use it too. Anyway, so create domain. Okay, I am going to name my domain, let's say email addresses, email varchar. Okay, that's better, because remember, it's an abstraction of a data type. It's not a column type or column name. It's an abstraction. So email varchar is the varchar where the regex, where we add a constraint of a regex, which always has to end with a particular email address. Okay, create domain email at varchar. Now next, as they talk about collation, which we don't need to cover in the scope of this particular live stream. In the future, I'm going to create another live stream on collation, and we can take a look, deep dive into that. But for now, we can skip collation. We can think about default. So you can add a default here. Let's say I want the default to be empty string. Okay, or actually admin add or no reply add teachmedatabase.com. okay, and then we have a constraint. Now you can define a constraint constraint by a name. So you have my constraint, or you can just define you can just use a check. So, or we can have like a check, and in the check function, you'd have to provide you have to use a value, which is whatever is passed to that particular check function. And the value, I wanted to have a value as a value applicable, or what should be the word I'm looking for, adhering to the regular expression I'm defining. So create domain email varchar. Oh, we have to specify the data type as well, as then the data type would be, I don't know, varchar. Now here is one thing very important to remember, although I can cover it afterwards. Give me 1 second, I will cover it later. But here I'm trying to define a varchar which always has a case, has a check added on top of it. So to check or to play around with regular expression, by the way, if you hear train, it is train passing nearby. I can do nothing about it. Okay, so I want all the emails to be like this. So it can start with anything, end with something, right? And the tool I'm using is Rubular. You can search on Google for it. It's a pretty cool tool, and it's a Ruby regular expression editor, but regular expression are pretty, I think it's POSIX regular expression. I'm forgetting the name. I think it is POSIX, but it's similar, and you can use same strategy in your Postgres as well. All right, what I want is, I want to teach me database, all the email to be ending with teach me database. So I want any single character, or what can the email have? Well, it can have any character. Should it provide smiley or emojis? Maybe not. So I'm gonna add something like A to Z, 0 to 9, and what else we can have? Dot. We can have. Can we have a comma? I don't think. And dash. No, I don't think so. And we want one or many, so it will have. We will have 0 or not 0, but it should have one or more. Okay, so we can have plus. So there we go. We have no reply, or we can have like, oops, let me check over here, sam at the rate teachmedatabase.com. There we have double, so there's our regular expression, and now we can use this regular expression in here. Okay, so there we go. So now we are creating a domain. Let's go back here. We're creating a domain. Create domain by the name. Then you have as varchar, whatever is the underlying data type. I chose a varchar. Then you have default if you want. You don't need a default. If you don't provide a default, then the default value will be set to, any guess? Null. Okay, so default I have specified no reply at the rate teachmedatabase.com. Okay, it's just a use case. And then we have a check here. The check is that the value of the email, the value added for any table which is using this underlying domain has to be adhering to this regular expression. So how can we use that? So now that you have defined, actually we have not really defined it. Let me run this, and there we go. We have defined a domain. Now I want to use this domain. So now I can create multiple tables, and the columns I can use this domain as a data type. So the how we create table, right? Create table, if not exist, what should be the name of our table? Maybe employee. Okay, and then we specify, well, then we specify columns. So let's say we have a name as varchar. Let's say I provide like not null. I don't know, I'm just making it up. Okay, and finally the email, official email. Official email can be of type email varchar. Okay, I don't need to provide a not null because I have already provided default. So in cases where the official email is not added for inserts, it is going to add a no reply at the rate teachmedatabase.com. Okay, I can also do like admin or whatever. That's not important. I'm just showing you right now, trying to show you how to use this. Okay, so let me try this, and we have a oops. Okay, I think from the last recording I was doing, I guess I didn't delete this employee table. I mean, I use it for something else, so I have to remove this syntax. Create table if exist, and then we have to provide the cascade option. Okay, cool. Now let's remove that. We don't have to worry about what I just did. And we have drop table, blah blah blah, completed. Okay, now select all from, come on man, employee, and we have employee table is pretty empty. Okay, now we're gonna insert into employee table. Cool. So insert, how you go about inserting? Okay, pretty simple. Insert. Now if you're using data graph, I really like data graph for these cases. Let's see, right now it's doing like autofill for everything, So all I have to do is ins and insert into employee. I'm just pressing enter. That's it. I'm just gonna press enter. That's why I say use data grid. Okay, it's much better. Enter name, official name, email. It already picked it up. Values. Now the value, I can add my own name, or you can let me in chat. Let me know in the chat if you want me to use your name, or I don't know, somebody else's name. Okay, looks like no one is watching. No worries, no worries. We're gonna build up our family slowly. So official email, I'm gonna add sprakss21221@gmail.com. What do you think it will happen if I try to do that? Let's try. Through an error, it said the value for domain email varchar violates check constraint email varchar check. So it looks like there is a constraint defined somewhere with the name of email varchar check, which is checking if this email adheres to this regular expression or not. Well, what if I add @teachmedatabase.com at the end? Let's remove this and add this guy. Let's try. Boom. It went in. Okay. So now I'm gonna do again select all from employee, and we have these two fields. Awesome. What now? I'm gonna show the power of defaults while providing it on the domain. So insert into employee official. I'm gonna remove this official email from there, and I'm gonna remove the name, this whole email thing, and Lola. I don't know who is Lola, but let's say there's a Lola there, and I try to insert it into the table. One row affected. Now I'm gonna go to employee. What do you think will be the new value added, new row added? Anyone? Okay. So remember, we have added a default. By default, by adding this default in the domain definition, what should happen is this default should be present in this case when we have not provided an official email value. So let's see. Oops, I added it again. My bad. Okay, select all from employee. You can see there's no reply, which is the default corresponding to the name Lola. I think I duplicated this, but it's all right. It's just to show you that it's just to show you the power of domain, the power of using defaults, and the power of having check. Okay. Now you have defined this domain as like this. You can also define the same thing as constraint, and then you can have email varchar constraint, and then you can have check email varchar new. Let's say I want to add a new one. I don't know, I'm just saying. And I converted it into this, and I'm gonna add the domain. So there are two ways to do that. Either you can have constraint, then constraint name, and then you have like whatever is the check. As they're saying, you can have constraint and then constraint name, and then you have to provide a check expression. Remember, there's no as or anything here. As is just here. If I remove this, okay, if I remove this, it's also going to be valid. So as right here is optional. Let's try to, I know the name is really bad, but I'm just trying to show you. So this domain is also created. What it means is when you're taking a look at PostgreSQL, that was my Alexa. Anyway, that means it's 9 o'clock. All right. What it means is this, whatever is in the square bracket for on PostgreSQL documentation, whatever you see over here, it pretty much means it's optional. So all of these in a square is optional, while like this means like options, and it can be either not null, either null, or check expression. Okay, so yeah, this is how kind of like how you create domain. Now let's get back to the documentation and read a little bit and try to understand and see if we missed anything, right? So create domain creates a new domain. Domain blah 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 is essentially a data type with optional constraint. We talked about it. Domains are useful for abstracting common constraint on field into a single location for maintenance as well as drying up your code. For example, several table might contain email address column, all requiring same check, just like exactly what we did here. Define a domain rather than setting up each table constraint individually. It cleans up your table definition. To be able to create a domain, you must have users privilege. Don't worry about that. I mean, it's mainly saying you should have the permission to create a domain in that particular schema. These are the parameters. We talked about it. Collation. Don't worry about collation right now. We can talk about collation in another live stream, or you can let me know in the comments or even in the chat if you are watching it live. And I will try to cover it in the next, maybe not next, but future live stream. Default, we played around with default. Constraint, we played around with that. There are not null as well. You can, instead of doing all this, I could also have not null, and that can be my overall constraint. Cool. This is, you can read more about it over here, all they're talking about. But one thing I do want to mention is, or actually, before I even go into that depth, I think we should work on one or two more examples. We already talked about one example. Let's take a look into one or two cool examples where it makes more sense to use domain. I also saw a Reddit question where I felt like the user could, the asker could use domain for their use case, but let's take a look into it. So first example, let's say in your team, or this is actually a practical problem which if you have been in the industry for a while, you might have faced it. Let's say you have a form where you have provided option for people to add text. Okay, let's say it is their job title or bug description. If you have a bug form, a report bug form, or you could have a title, you could have a job code, and so on, and all the you can formalize all of them. I mean, you can generalize all of them and use text, right? But the problem with using text or varchar without specifying the limit for each type is, first of all, you're using a lot of memory. Secondly, you're exposing your database to some bad element trying to overload your data with a lot of data set, and that is going to slow down your database performance. So let's say if you provided text, which is pretty much a lot of words, what's going to happen is somebody can write a very long text and try to submit that form again and again, and that can cause your database queries to run very slowly. So instead of that, we want to formalize our overall process. We want to formalize what should be the maximum allowed for certain type of data type. So if you are using like short data type, it should be only like 5 letter or 10 letter. If you're using medium, it should be like, I don't know, 500. And if you're using long, then the maximum should be like 20,000 or I don't know, 100,000 characters. Okay. So how can we go about solving this problem? Very simple. So what we can do is create domain. Okay. And if you remember, create domain, you have to provide a name for that. So name can be small varchar, okay, as it will use varchar. Now there's one thing I want to tell you about. Normally in varchar, right at the definition time, we can provide a value, right, like over here. If you do this and not actually define, you know, an overall what's it called, check or constraint, if you just do this, you will have a varchar with a limit of 255. But if you try to add a constraint on top of it, like, you know, like check, and you say in the check like, and this is a gotcha, and we should take a look into it, okay, and we say length, the length of the value is less than, let's say, 50. The check, there are two checks. First, is it 255, is it 50? Now the issue with this, or actually let me do this one, okay, this is better. So in this case, what's going to happen is, if you add a value greater than 1, the first check, greater than 1 smaller than 50, the first check is going to pass. Sorry, the second check, what I'm trying to say is domain check is going to pass. But you're going to have another check, which is going to be varchar check, which only allows 1 character, and that is going to fail. So there's no overriding here, okay. For default, there is an overriding. So when you are defining a table, you can have a default defined at the table. On data type as well, you can have a default defined at the data type side, and the hierarchy for that works like the data type default can be overridden by domain default. The domain default can be overridden if you have defined an email, sorry, not email, the table column default when you're defining the table. So that's how the overriding hierarchy works, okay. But it doesn't, I should say, it doesn't work the same way for when you are using varchar and you're providing like 1 over here and this. They both, this is not default case, they both are gonna be respected. So it's not a good idea to add both. Anyway, getting back to what we were talking about, create domain small varchar as varchar check length. Let's say my small varchar should be less than 5. Okay, we have defined that. Again, we can do a lot of stuff. We can have a default here, right? We can have a constraint, and we can define like a name constraint here, but I don't want to do that, okay. All I want is to showcase how can we solve this problem. So we have defined small varchar, and then we have maybe medium varchar, okay. Or actually I should say maybe text. Medium text, okay, cool. And this is like 500 maybe, or maybe 100. 500 is better. And finally I'm gonna add another one. Whoops, come on. Okay, and this is long text, and I'm going to define it as let's say 100,000. okay, length of the value is less than 100,000. Sounds good. So here we got 3 of the domains. Let me run all of that. Okay, 3 of the domains, and now your team, your company can use these predefined pre-constrained text types for all use cases. So now anyone else can create a table, and they can do, if not exist, employee, actually payroll maybe, okay, or sorry, let's use bug form, okay. And now in bug form we have I don't know, like name, or I should say uh, bug type, maybe. Yeah, sure, why not? Small text. Then we have submitter name as medium text, and finally we have bug description as long text. Okay, we don't need to use as. This is pretty much it. Okay, and we got a table. Now we can insert some value in here and check if that works. Insert into bug form. Let me actually try 1 second. Okay, better. Cool. Insert into there we go. Insert into bug form the values. I want to have, like, I don't know, like let's say N6AAEE. Okay, 5-letter. Name is sorrow, and bug is this bug sucks whenever whatever blah blah, whatever. People can fill it up. Okay, what do you think? Would this go in or not? It won't. Why? Because let's see what it's saying. Value for domain small text value, check constraint small text. So it looks like we have defined less than 5, but this is 5. If I remove 1, what is gonna happen? Any guess? Let's see. And it went pretty good. It went in. Select all from bug form, and we have this guy over here. Easy peasy. Alright, moving ahead, another example just to hit it home. So this example is actually an attempt to answer the question asked by this Reddit user on PostgreSQL Reddit forum. So essentially what he was asking is there a way that he could create a website builder which is powered by the PostgreSQL, so people can create or people can use generic or unit building blocks to create their own pages. So let's say the generic, why I'm saying generic, let's say the unit blocks are select box, checkbox, drop down, and text area, and you want everyone to only be able to use those. You want all the types to be either of those 4. And let's say we have a table where in the table a user can add only one of those types as the type of the HTML element, and then there can be behavior which you can store as JSON. Okay, so let's solve this problem. I want to define create domain and then as maybe varchar. Okay, and then I'm gonna define actually I have to provide a domain name, so HTML type web builder web HTML unit type. It's fine, yeah, HTML unit type. It could be a better name for this, but I'm fine with this. HTML unit type as varchar, and then I'm gonna add, not a case, check, and in the check what I want the value to be either what we talk about, checkbox right? Or select box, okay? Or modal, actually radio, or text area. That's it. And so if anyone is defining like a table where we have create table if not exist HTML element, okay, and then you can provide like now the type can be either of this HTML unit type, and the behavior, you can have behavior here as an empty JSON, okay, or JSONB if you want. So you can have different behaviors for different types. So how do we go about making sure the value is either of these four? And domain, adding a check on domain will allow you to do that. So I'm gonna go back to my ruler and do the same thing, exact same thing, and we're gonna simply try to write a very simple regular expression which is gonna help us do that. So I'm just gonna paste all that. So I want this or this or this, oops, or this, and I want to start and end it as well, so I don't want any more character. So what I'm gonna do, start and then you end. And remember, to be able to capture, like to be able to do A and B, we have to provide a bounding box over here as a parenthesis, and then you have either checkbox or select box or radio or text area, okay. So the value could be this, okay, pretty cool. Now what happens if I don't use this guy? Let's see, what if I remove this? It works, and it works in this case as well. But for the sake for this case, I feel confident on using parenthesis because it's easier to read as well. But it looks like we can also use it without. All right. Let me see if anyone is watching. If anyone is watching, is say hello. Okay. Now that we have this regex in place, by the way, if you are hearing outside noise, it's the road. So, oops. So I'm gonna try to create this domain again. Now we have defined the types, okay. So here we have the types defined. Let's see what is create domain, blah blah blah. Okay, looks like it went through, and now I want to create a table which uses this HTML unit type, and it has a behavior and maybe a user ID as well, okay. User ID is integer, and that can be a foreign key, okay. Foreign key, wait, but we don't have to go, and there should be a comma, foreign key. Let me see. Can be something like foreign key, but don't worry about it. We can remove this, and let's create this table. This table has been created, that's all good. Finally, we're gonna try to add. Now, as per his question is, say you are an admin, you are creating a new register, you want to create new select drop down with a list of options for short sizes. So you can also have like list options over here, okay, list options, and that can also be one, so people can only add either of these, and you can create like one of those, okay. So now I'm going to insert, let's say an admin, I am an admin, like the admin over here of the admin of the dashboard I'm building, insert into HTML element. Wait, let me into HTML element. Oh, I should have HTML elements. but it's all right. Type behavior values. So if I want to add, let's say modal and an empty JSON, maybe, what do you think is gonna happen? It's gonna throw an error. But what if I want to add a checkbox? It's gonna go through. So now we can have a select all from not employee HTML element, and there we go. So what it means is now you can have a form which mainly allows some front-end magic to choose bunch of stuff, and based on those bunch of stuff, the value stored for a particular after the creation of an HTML element by a particular user can be stored in HTML element table. It should be HTML elements actually, but I hope you gathered the idea. We defined a type which can either be checkbox, select box, radio, and text area, and there can be behavior with that which you can define in your model, and thus we provided a constraint of what building blocks can be used for this particular website builder application. So we have seen 2 of these examples, actually 3 of these. So I hope it makes a bit more sense to you on what is domain and what can you use it for. Pretty cool. You should try it out. And having said that, for the sake of time, we're gonna be moving ahead, and we're gonna be taking a look at where are the constraints added. So when I do this, it throws an error, right? It throws like value for domain HTML unit type violates check constraint HTML unit type check. Well, let's read it again. Value for domain HTML unit type violates check constraint. It feels like there's a check constraint somewhere defined. The check constraint name is HTML unit type check, which is preventing us, or maybe Postgres is looking at that check in order to determine that should this particular value go in or should not. Well, if you want to take a look at where all these constraints are added, you should take a look into this system catalog, or it's just a system table, internal system table, and you can see over here we have HTML unit type check added as a constraint name. We have a common space and all. You don't have to worry about all this, but PostgreSQL adds your constraint, the checks you have defined over here. If you have provided a constraint name, let's say I added like, constraint name as foo, right? In that case, this value, this here would be foo. But since we have provided like no constraint user defined name for the constraint, Postgres creates a name by the type, the domain name, HTML unit type underscore, then the check. Okay. So if you want to see where exactly are those constraints available or added, it's added in PG constraint. You can read more about PG constraint if you want. I think let me go to, not here, PG constraint. Okay, it is a system catalog, means it's an internal table which is maintained by your Postgres, and you can read more about it by searching for PG constraint PostgreSQL. So now we have a little bit understanding of where are your constraint really added and available to you, for where let me rephrase it again, where PostgreSQL adds those constraints. Now it's PG constraint table. Okay, moving on, how do we go about dropping domain? Now there are some gotchas, there are some caveats involved which you have to think through. If there is a domain on which you added in it, or you populated a table column, and they're like, I don't know, even more than one row in that particular table, when you go about dropping the domain, it's not gonna let you drop unless you specifically ask it to. For that case, Let me change it to a bigger skin so you can see my beautiful face. So in that case, though you should use cascading, and in that case it's a dangerous operation because you will be losing the data. The way to go about it is you should take a backup of your database, make sure that column, all the, if it's in production, you should make sure that all the column which you're going to be dropping, by dropping that domain, you have a copy of that, you've taken a copy, you've stored it somewhere, and then you go about dropping the domain. So how do we go about dropping the domain? Pretty simple. On the left side, let's head back to our pairing screen. There we go. Okay. So drop domain, pretty simple. Drop domain if, and it's always good to check, if exist, and we're gonna be dropping one of those domain here. So HTML unit type. Okay. Now here you can see we have added one data, or I should say one row in this table. When I try to drop this domain, it will not allow me to drop it. It will say cannot drop type HTML unit because other objects depend on it. Column type of table HTML element depends on this particular domain. So this restrict is the keyword which is by default added, and this is the one which refuses to drop the domain if any objects depend on it. And remember, PostgreSQL is an object relational database, so all the rows and everything are stored as objects. That's why it's saying that if any objects, by that it means if any row depends, if one of the column in the row depends on this particular domain. So for that we have to provide a cascade option. Now I told you have to be very careful about dropping domain. Why? I will just show you right now. Take a look at this. What happened over here? Let me close all the other things. Whoops. Okay. Let me go back here and let's take a look at the HTML element. As you can see, the column has been deleted and only the behavior column is remaining. And if this was production, you would be losing data. That's why I was saying it's very important to ensure that you have taken a copy before you do the drop operation. And if you want to do the drop operation, then you should do a cascade. Another gotcha is sometime for constraint, if we take a look over here, you can in the constraint you can provide an expression. Okay. If your expression or even a function, let's say there is a function which returns a value and you are saying that given an like value equal function, like the function output value, you have to ensure that the function itself is immutable. By that I mean the function should return present or past or future. The function should return the same value again and again for a particular input. If you go about changing, let's say you define a domain and you are using a user defined function for the constraint or the checks, and after defining the domain and after filling up the data, you go back and change the function definition so it's not immutable anymore, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Because now when you try to dump or reload the data from or in your database, it's not going to let you, it's going to throw an error. In that case, the best approach for you would be, first of all, same thing, you have to drop the constraint you can use drop like drop domain, you can use alter domain, drop the constraint, and then you have to preserve the data somewhere, and then you have to re-add the new constraint. If there are data which is not going to allow you, which doesn't adhere to the new constraint, it's going to throw an error and you have to readjust that data. For that, For these two reasons, I think it's better to use alter domain rather than a drop domain. So let's take a look into altering a domain. Alter domain is also pretty simple, and I'm going to pull out the documentation and you can read more about it. I'm just going to do like one altering. Okay. Alter domain, oops, if exists. Actually, I cannot do if exists, which is weird, but it is what it is. Alter domain, I'm gonna go back to one of the older domain which we used. Long text, not really, small text. Okay, cool. Alter domain small text, set default as none. Actually, I might not have to add default. Okay. Alter domain, let's see. So this guy got operated. Now I am going to go back here. Let's go to the bug form and try to insert a value here. Oops. So instead of, so this is small text, that is this. Okay, let me remove this. I've seen some weird things, by the way, when I have done that. I wonder if it happens again or not. We'll see. Now try to do that, and I'm gonna try to select all from bug form. Yeah. And you can, so since we have not provided, first of all we alter the domain, and we set the default as none. And since we didn't provide in this particular insertion a value corresponding to the small text, the default was applied, so it became none. Okay, and that's how we altered it. We can also, let me try to drop it. Okay, alter domain small text drop default. Okay, so the output says it's been completed, and now I'm gonna add maybe Sam, and let's see all from the bug form, and you can see the default was not there, so nothing was added, it is null. You can alter a bunch of stuff. You can alter the name, you can alter the default expression, which we did, like we added or set default. You can do a not null null. You can do a drop the constraint. You can rename a constraint. You can remove the constraint and add a new constraint, like I talked about when you are using a function. Yeah, there are other ways. You can have schema. You can have name changes and so on. You can read about it more over here if you want in each detail. For the scope, although alternate attempts to verify that blah blah blah, you can read a bit more about it over here. But for the scope of this, and they also have some examples. There's like a constraint they're dropping and all. It's kind of the same what we are doing over here. But for this, I think this is enough to cover altering of the domain. You should go ahead and afterwards maybe try to work with some examples and get some practice. And just watching my live video is not going to be enough. If you have question, ask me. But the right way to learn would be see the video, use it as a reference, go back to the documentation, try it out, think about use cases, and then work with it. And that's the best way to learn, in my opinion. Finally, I would like to get into the source code a little bit. So far we do understand that all the constraint you add on a domain, again, let's recap. A domain is a user defined, a domain is mainly an abstraction on any type of data type available in Postgres, which essentially adds a constraint on top of the data type, and that user defined domain can be used across all the schema, across all the user who have the permission, and that actually can dry up your code, and you don't have to people don't have to share the constraint. They can just share that, hey, there's a domain, this is our standardized, for example, for our first use case, this is our whenever you're using a small text, use the small text domain. Don't use a varchar. Don't think about varchar variation and all. Just use small text. Maybe some principal developer define this, and now all the others developer just use small text, medium text, or long text, and all the problem is resolved, right? We also saw that the constraint which we define are stored in the PG constraint system catalog, which is available from PostgreSQL. I was just watching if you can hear the sound or not. Anyway, let me go back to the first screen. Okay. Finally, I think it's time for us to take a look into the source code and try to make sense of it. Now, again, if you are a new programmer, I don't expect you to understand everything. Of course, you don't. So the right way is practice it, and then if you are curious, I mean, it's totally fine that you don't want to go into the detail, but I like to, and that's the whole point of my channel. I like to go into the detail of how things work. I'm fascinated by it. So for that reason, next step is gonna be peeling off the outer layer and really understanding the code. Again, it's nothing fancy, it's just C code, you know. It's nothing different. It's just code, which according to Dijkstra, it can be sequence, it can be loop, and it can be iteration. Sequence iteration, and what was the last one? Sequence iteration, conditionals. Yeah, sorry. So conditional, sequence iteration, all the code in the world can be summarized by those three. We don't need any others. So if you have that in your mind, you can always go ahead and try to understand the code as much as you can. And of course, Postgres, whenever I have some, I have deep questions, I always go to the Postgres forum right over here, and I also sometimes contact them and I ask them question, hey, can you help me understand? Or I can also add a bug report if I want to. Anyway, let's get back here to our PostgreSQL domain.c and Doxygen. They're doing awesome work. PostgreSQL.org, Doxygen subdomain is the one where they have a mirror of all the source code. So let's take a look into this. So domain.c, as you already saw here, is a C file, or I should say it's a class which handles domain functioning for us. Let's see what they say. Domain.c, IO function for domain types. The output function for a domain type are just the same one provided by its underlying base type, which can be a varchar, integer, etc. But the input function, however, must be prepared to apply any constant defined by the type. So what they are saying is, so we create a special input function that invoke the base type input function and then check the constant. What they're saying is, internally when you define a constraint, they define to handle the constraint to make sure that apart from your underlying data type constraint, the user defined constraint is also evaluated, and they create a function which they can refer to whenever somebody adds a new column value which relies on that domain. So they create a function which checks the constraint for you apart from checking the constraint for the underlying data type, and that's how they handle it in PostgreSQL C. Also, they mentioned that we just saw here, I remember we just saw over here in PG constraint that PostgreSQL needs to take a look into or ask PG constraint table for the constraint on a particular for the constraint related to a particular column defined by a domain. instead of, and that can be costly. So that's what they're saying, that the overhead required for constraint checking can be high, since examining the catalog, and what is the catalog? PG catalog, system catalog, PG constraint table, to discover the constraint for a given domain is not cheap. We have three mechanisms for minimizing this cost. We rely on the type cache to keep up-to-date copies of the constraint. So they use caching pretty much to have the cache the constraint in order to use the cache directly instead of going to the PG constraint table or the catalog. In a nest of domain, that means a domain defined on top of another domain defined on top of another domain. They flatten the checking of all the labels into just one operation. You don't have to worry about that. If they are check constraint, we cache a standalone expression context to evaluate them in. So they're saying if they are check constraint, so like we have defined here, like check, right? Let's see, check. So if they are check constraint, we cache a standalone expression context to evaluate them in. Now what is this expression context? Let's go over here. And I think it's defined, maybe it's defined here. Let me find this. Expression context, okay. List of callbacks to be called at expression context. No, not this. Expression context. So, okay. This class holds the current context information needed to evaluate expression for doing tuple qualification and tuple projection. For example, if an expression refers to an attribute in the blah 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 blah. You can spend some time, but all in all, essentially they are saying is there is a separate class which they use for evaluating your constraint which you have defined, and the result value, which is normally a boolean. Let me see here. Type div. There is a boolean. I'm sure it is a boolean somewhere. I mean, it returns a boolean, and if it evaluates your check constraint effectively, correctly, it will evaluate it. Otherwise, it will throw an error. So what they're saying is they have a separate cache. By that, they have a separate memory, and they access that memory in C, and they store they store the result of your check for that particular value in the expr context variable. Okay, or I should say expr context pointer, maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. We don't make an expr until needed. Okay, blah blah blah. So this is the one, context for evaluated check constraint in expr context. Your check, which we define right here, check. That's where it gets evaluated, and they have a memory context where this cache is stored. They store this here as well in the domain IO data struct, or I should say the object created. It's not really object. It's a type struct. It's an instance of type struct. Yeah. The most I mean, you can read through this. It's all good. It's called domain IO data and all domain. This is all domain setup and everything. But the most important part you should take a look into is domain. Yeah, domain check input, which is the one which applies the cache checks. So it evaluates into this context, but where is the logic for applying it? So it's saying that for all the constraint, go through all the constraint on that particular, flatten out the context and then go through all the context and one by one, as per the constraint type, evaluate them. So if you have a not null constraint type, it's going to be evaluated like this. And if it doesn't evaluate properly, it will throw an error like domain does not allow null value. Let's go to this example right here. Okay, where was that? Okay, right here. And take a look at this error. Column type of relation HTML does not exist. You have a check, remember? So this one is the one which is checking. This is a DOM constraint check. It says make the e-context if it didn't already. So there is an e-context. Okay, that's all good. This is related to memory handling. And it mainly evaluates the context and all. Here it says exec check, it let the exec check return the value, and if there has been an error in the while checking, then the error, I mean, it throws an error where the error message says value for domain, then there is a string violates check constraint, whatever is the check constraint. And here you can see, actually one second, or did I remove it? Let me try insert into employee. Okay, I'm trying to, okay, this is better. Value for domain email varchar values check constraint right here. Value for domain this values check constraint. So this is the piece of code which is throwing this error right here. This is the C code. And if you wanna go a bit more deep, go to exec check, which we have open, I think right here somewhere. Yeah, exec. Let me open this exec check, and this exec expression, what it does, let's see. Expression evaluation infrastructure, this is the one which evaluates your expression. Check, the expression you define inside check is evaluated with expression, and you can have expression context. Typically the context will be the same as blah 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 expression. Let me see, actually this is this expression context. No, where did it go? Let's exec check. Okay, let me grab this guy, come here, exec check. Nope. Okay, exec check. Okay, it returns a bool, right? Okay, bool, not bool, sorry. It returns a bool, and here it goes. Exec evaluate a check constant. So this is the one which actually evaluates the check constant you have defined. For check constant, a null result is taken as true. That is, the constant passes. The check constant may have been prepared with that is extra information, but here it returns a bool, not a bool. It returns a bool. Verify the expression will not compile using, this is like internal, like how they're executing the eval expression. They're executing the expression, and based on the expression evaluated, they're finally returning the bool value, which is being checked here. If they're saying if it evaluates to, if it is false, in that case throw an error, and the error is the one which is value for domain something. The error domain, the error comes from here, and actually no, for the error comes from here, yeah, format type. But anyway, the whole point is the error we see here, the piece of code in PostgreSQL which evaluates your constraint is right here, this code. And exec check is the one which evaluates your expression which you have defined. The expression for us is this regular expression, and as per the value, as per the return value of the boolean, we get an error, or either it evaluates properly, or we get an error and it breaks and it throws an error. And right here is the error we are seeing. So I think I have covered domain properly, and I really appreciate if you guys were available in this live video. If not, it's all right. I will have more live videos. You can use this as a reference. Thank you for watching. Other than that, yeah, if you like the value of what I'm providing, subscribe, share with others, leave in description how or what's your use case for using the domain. And if you have a PostgreSQL question, let me know in comments, and I would try to help you out with whatever ability I have. So yeah, thank you. Good night. Take care.